The day my wife was buried, my son put his arm around me and said, "Dad, you'll never go through anything alone again." I believed him. That was 3 years ago. I should have paid more attention to what he didn't say. My name is Martin. I'm 67 years old, and I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county of Allegheny, Pennsylvania. I built bridges for a living. I knew how much weight a structure could hold before it failed. I thought I knew the same thing about people. My wife, June, died on a Tuesday in March, pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed in October and gone by spring. That's how fast it went. We had 42 years together. 42 years of the same coffee mugs in the morning, the same side of the bed, the same way she'd squeeze my hand twice when she fell asleep watching TV and didn't want to admit it. And then nothing. Just the house, too quiet, smelling faintly of the lavender she kept in a bowl on the kitchen windowsill. My son, I'll call him by what he is, my son. He's 38. His wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law. They live 40 minutes from me, in a newer development outside Pittsburgh, the kind of neighborhood where every house looks like every other house, and the HOA sends letters if your grass gets half an inch too long. For the first year after June died, my son called me every few days. He came over on Sundays. He brought food his wife had made, casseroles mostly, the kind that last in the freezer. I told him he didn't have to do that. He said that's what family does. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't suspicious. I was grateful. I was a 64-year-old widower who was learning for the first time in 4 decades how to exist in a house by himself. My son showing up felt like a rope thrown to a man who'd fallen overboard. I grabbed it without checking what the other end was tied to. The house is worth about $740,000 now. I know because my neighbor Bev sold hers 2 years ago, and the market only went up from there. I paid $187,000 for it in 1994. June and I replaced the roof, the furnace, both bathrooms. The backyard has a deck I built myself over 2 summers. There's a Japanese maple in the corner that June planted from a seedling. It's taller than the garage now. I also have a pension from the county, my Social Security, and about $310,000 in a retirement account. I'm not a wealthy man, but I'm comfortable. More than comfortable. June and I lived carefully. We didn't take big vacations or buy things we couldn't afford. We just saved year after year, the way people used to. I think that's what my son saw when he looked at me after his mother died. Not his father. An estate. It started small, the way these things always do. About 8 months after June passed, my son mentioned that his wife's hours had been cut at work. He didn't ask for anything. Just mentioned it. I asked if they were managing okay. He said they were figuring it out. I gave him $8,000. I didn't think twice about it. He said it was a loan. We never talked about repayment. 6 months later, the furnace went out. Another $5,500. Then the car needed transmission work. Then there was something about a leak in their basement that insurance wouldn't cover. By the time 18 months had passed, I had given them somewhere in the range of $28,000, and I had a vague, uncomfortable feeling that I had been moving in one direction without ever deciding to go anywhere. My son started coming over more often, not just Sundays. He'd stop by on weekday evenings after dinner. He'd walk through the house like he was taking inventory. He'd open cabinets in the kitchen while we were talking, glance into the garage, ask casually what I was planning to do with June's car. I told him I hadn't decided. He said he knew someone who'd give me a fair price. I noticed things. I noticed them, and I filed them away, and I told myself I was being unfair. That grief makes you paranoid, that this was my son, and he was just trying to help. Then his wife started coming with him. She was pleasant, Always pleasant, the kind of pleasant that requires effort to maintain. She'd compliment the house, the crown molding, the fireplace, the yard. "You know," she said once, standing at the kitchen window looking out at the deck, "a place like this, you could get top dollar right now. Inventory is so low." She laughed after she said it, like it was a joke. I smiled like I agreed it was. That night, after they left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I need to tell you about my attorney because she matters to this story. Her name is Deborah. She handled our estate planning back when June and I were in our 50s, and after June died, she helped me update everything. She's in her late 60s, semi-retired, sharp in the way of someone who has seen every version of the same mistake. I trust her the way I trust the load-bearing calculations I used to run at work. She doesn't round up. She doesn't guess. About 2 years after June died, I called Deborah, not because anything specific had happened, but because something in my chest had been tightening for months. I described the pattern of requests, the money I'd given, the way my son walked through my house, the comments his wife made about property values. Deborah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Martin, has anyone talked to you recently about a power of attorney?" I said no. She said, "They will." She was right. 3 weeks later, my son sat down at my kitchen table with a manila folder and told me he'd been doing some thinking about planning ahead. He had printed out a durable power of attorney form. He said it was just good sense, given my age, given that I lived alone. He said he just wanted to be able to help me if something happened. I looked at the form. I looked at my son. I thought about all the Sunday casseroles and the check-in calls and the $28,000. I said, "Let me have Deborah look it over." Something shifted in his face. Just briefly. He said, "Of course, no rush, just something to think about." I called Deborah that evening. She told me to come in the next morning. I did. I sat across from her desk, and she walked me through what signing that document would have meant. My son would have had authority to manage my finances, sell property, make medical decisions. He could have listed my house without me lifting a pen. I drove home and I sat in the driveway for 15 minutes before I went inside. Here is what I did next, and I want to be specific because this is the part that mattered. First, I updated my will. I had already done this after June died, but I updated it again, more explicitly, and I added a letter of instruction that detailed my wishes for every significant asset. Deborah kept a copy. My accountant kept a copy. I kept one in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet. Second, I added a trusted contact to my brokerage accounts, not my son, but my neighbor Bev's husband, Ray, who I've known for 22 years. I also called my bank and asked them to flag any unusual transfer requests and require a secondary verification for withdrawals above a certain amount. Third, I did not sign the power of attorney. My son asked about it again the following month. I told him I decided I wasn't ready to take that step. He said he understood. He said it in the way that means the opposite. After that, the Sunday visits started coming less often. The calls spaced out. He was still polite when we talked, but polite in a different way. Formal, like someone waiting for a situation to change. I missed him. I want to say that clearly. I missed my son the way I'd known him before I started seeing him clearly. That grief sat right alongside the grief for June. Different in kind, but not in weight. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I was wrong about everything, if I was a paranoid old man pushing away his only child over a document. Then came the anniversary of June's death. My son called 2 days before to suggest that we have dinner together, the three of us, at their house. A meal to remember her. He said his wife was planning to cook Jules's recipe for pot roast. She'd gotten it from June years ago and wanted to honor her memory. I said yes. I told him it meant a lot to me. The morning of the dinner, I drove to the cemetery first. I sat with June for a while. I told her about the maple tree, that it had made it through the winter. I told her I was trying to pay attention. She would have known what I meant. I got to my son's house at 6. His wife answered the door and hugged me and said it smelled like rain coming. My son was in the kitchen. There was music on, low, something instrumental. It felt for a moment like it was supposed to feel. We ate. We talked about June. Real things, not polished things. The way she sang in the car, badly and with conviction. The time she got into an argument with a stranger at a Steelers game and won. My daughter-in-law teared up, and I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just my family, and I've been so afraid of losing more that I've been seeing threats everywhere. After dinner, my son offered me a second glass of wine. I accepted it, and we moved to the living room. His wife excused herself to clear the dishes. I heard her moving around in the kitchen. Then I heard her stop moving. I heard faintly the soft sound of her voice, not the words, just the tone. She was on the phone. My son started talking about something. I don't remember what. He was doing what I can only describe as performing conversation, filling space. He asked me about my neighbor's new fence. He asked me if I'd watched a game last weekend. He was keeping me in that chair. I don't know what made me do it. Call it instinct. Call it 31 years of reading stress fractures in materials that looked fine from the outside. I said, "Excuse me," stood up, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. My daughter-in-law was standing at the far end of the kitchen with her back to me, phone to her ear. She heard me come in and turned halfway. Her face did something complicated. I heard the voice on the other end of the call clearly enough. "Just text me when you're leaving and I'll meet you there." She ended the call. She smiled at me. She said she was just confirming some plans for the weekend. I said, "Of course." I got my water. I went back to the living room. I sat down and finished my glass of wine and smiled and said the pot roast had been wonderful and I should get home before the rain. My son hugged me at the door. His wife said, "Drive safe." They washed me back out of the driveway. I drove around the block. I parked where I could see the end of their street. 4 minutes later, my son's car pulled out of the driveway and turned toward my neighborhood. I called Ray. Ray had a key to my house. He'd had one for years, the emergency kind, the kind you give to someone you trust when you live alone. I asked him if he could go over and see if anyone came by. He asked me what was happening. I told him to call me if a car pulled up. I drove home the long way. I was perhaps 12 minutes behind my son. When I turned onto my street, Ray's porch light was on, and Ray was standing on his front walkway. I parked and got out. He nodded toward my house and said a man in a gray Subaru had pulled up 7 minutes ago. He had watched the man walk around to the back of the house. He had called a non-emergency police line because I had asked him to do that if anyone showed up on the property when I wasn't home. 2 officers had arrived about 4 minutes before I did. The man, someone I'd never seen before, a locksmith, as it turned out, was standing at my back door. He had told the officers he'd been hired to change the locks. He had a name on his work order. The name was my son's. I walked into my backyard. My son's car was parked at the curb now. He'd arrived while the officers were still there. He was standing on the back patio looking like a man watching a building fall. I stood there and looked at my son for a long time. I thought about the arm around my shoulder at the cemetery. I thought about the casseroles in the freezer. I thought about all the mornings I had given him the benefit of the doubt, because he was June's son too, and that meant something to me, even when it shouldn't have. I said, "You were going to change the locks, and then what?" He started with the word Dad. That was all, just Dad, like the beginning of an explanation that hadn't been written yet. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to file a report. I told him yes. The locksmith showed them the work order on his phone. The officers took photos. My son stood there while all of this happened. His wife never came. She was still at their house, I suppose, waiting for a text that would tell her it was done. I called Deborah at 7 the next morning. She had been waiting for something like this, I think. She was calm and she was quick. Within 2 days, she had sent a formal cease and desist regarding any attempt to access, encumber, or list my property. Within a week, she had filed a complaint documenting the attempted unauthorized entry and the fraudulent work order placed in my name with the locksmith. My son hired an attorney. He insisted what happened was a misunderstanding. His attorney sent a letter suggesting that I had become isolated and that my judgment was impaired. That's the play, I've learned. When the scheme fails, you claim the person who caught you isn't thinking clearly. It's a way of trying to take the story away from the person who lived it. My attorney filed a response. She attached the work order with my son's name on it. She attached the police report. She attached records of the $28,000 in transfers, which she characterized as improper inducements to gain influence over my estate planning. She was thorough in the way that costs other people sleep. There were no further letters after that. My son and I have not spoken since. I won't tell you. That doesn't hurt, because it does. I won't dress it up in something it isn't. He is my son, and I love him the way you love someone for decades before you understand who they are, and both of those things are true at the same time, and I don't know what to do with that, except to live with it. What I can tell you is what I did with the house. I didn't sell it. I didn't move. I'm still here in the same kitchen, with June's lavender bowl on the windowsill. Empty now, but I can't bring myself to move it. The Japanese maple in the backyard made it through another winter and is budding again. I updated my estate documents a final time last fall. The house will pass to a charitable remainder trust that June and I had talked about once, a long time ago. A scholarship fund for engineering students at the university where I got my degree. Deborah handled it. My accountant signed off on it. Ray witnessed the paperwork at my kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon in October, and afterward we had coffee, and he told me about a problem he was having with his gutters, and I helped him think through a solution. That was a good day. I've thought a lot about what I would do differently, and the honest answer is almost nothing, except I would have called Deborah sooner. Not because it would have changed the outcome. It wouldn't have. But because I spent a year and a half carrying something I didn't have to carry alone. I kept giving my son chances he hadn't earned, because I was afraid that cutting the rope meant admitting the thing I'd been avoiding, which is that some people you love will take from you without limit if you let them, and the most painful part isn't what they take. The most painful part is realizing they were counting on you to let them. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a house I built a life in. I know how much weight a structure can hold before it fails. I also know that sometimes you have to let a structure fail rather than keep reinforcing the wrong thing. June knew that. She would have seen it before I did. She always paid closer attention to people than I did. Watch their hands, she used to say, not their faces. Their faces will lie. Their hands tell you what they're really doing. I think about that a lot now. I think about her hands too. The way she'd squeeze twice when she was drifting off to sleep. That's the part I carry. Not the rest of it. Just that. I've spent a lot of time since that night thinking about what actually happened. Not the legal pieces, not the police report, but the thing underneath all of it. The reason it worked out the way it did. It wasn't luck. I want to be honest about that. A lot of it came down to one decision I made quietly, without drama, without confronting anyone. I paid attention. Not the anxious kind of attention that looks for reasons to be afraid. The steady kind. The kind that lets you watch something develop and name it for what it is before it gets too far. My son was counting on the opposite. He was counting on the version of me that wanted things to be fine. And that version was real. I did want things to be fine. I wanted my son to be who I thought he was. I wanted the Sunday visits and the casseroles to mean what they looked like they meant. That desire, the one to believe the best, is not a weakness. It's human. But I had to learn that holding on to it past the point of evidence isn't loyalty. It's something closer to negligence toward yourself. There's a kind of courage that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's the courage to act on what you actually know instead of what you wish were true. It took me longer than it should have to call Deborah. Not because I didn't have suspicions, but because acting on them meant admitting they were real. And once I admitted they were real, I had to accept that my son had been making choices, deliberate, calculated choices, for a long time. That's a hard thing to carry. It still is, but here's what I've come to understand about the way things unfold. When people act from pure self-interest, they don't plan for the person on the other end to be paying attention. The whole scheme, the dinner, the pot roast, June's recipe used as cover, it depended on me being too distracted by grief to notice I was being managed. The moment I stood up and walked into that kitchen, the entire structure collapsed. Not because I did anything dramatic, just because I was present. That's the thing about integrity, about keeping your eyes clear, even when it's uncomfortable to do so. It doesn't announce itself, it just quietly remains functional when everything else is trying to make you look away. I think about what I want the rest of my life to look like. I'm 67. I have the house, the pension, the maple tree June planted. I have Ray next door, who stood on his front walkway in the dark because I asked him to. I have Deborah, who picked up the phone at 7 in the morning without making me explain why it was urgent. Those relationships, built on nothing but consistency and honesty over many years, turned out to be worth more than anything on a balance sheet. What my son tried to take wasn't really the house. He tried to take the story, the version of events where he gets to decide what happens to a life I built. That's the part I wouldn't give him. June used to say, "Watch their hands, not their faces. Their faces will lie. Their hands tell you what they're actually doing." I watched. That made all the difference.